So you've seen the basic strokes, you've practiced them, now let's connect them and finally put them together. Before we begin, there's always things I want you to know. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to really dig deep and show you when we're connecting strokes, what are we actually doing? Are we just putting them together and hoping it looks great, or are we being very conscious and precise with where we put that pen tip? Because remember how the pen is flexible, so depending on how we're pressing down the pen, it really matters the placement of the pen each time you make a stroke. Remember with my example of the cursive, you don't really have to lift your pen with cursive. You could just write cursive without ever lifting your pen. You pretty much lift it just to dot the I and cross the T. But with calligraphy, I like to show this example. If I were to write calligraphy the way I do cursive, look what would happen. So I'm going to write the word learn, and I'm not lifting my pen. I'm still applying thin and thick, but I'm not lifting my pen from the page. It has never left the page. Okay, so not too bad, right? It kind of looks like calligraphy. I used my brush pen. I tried to apply thin and thick, but watch the difference when I do the most important key when you're connecting letters, and that is to lift. In this part of the course, now your mantra, you already remember thin up and thick down. Now I want you to drill into your memory, lift, 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 okay? All you're doing is lifting after each stroke. It's gonna seem kind of weird at first. Maybe you're not used to lifting your pen. It took me a while to learn how to lift my pen after each stroke. It was really training my muscles to, after each stroke, don't rush into the next one. Lift your pen off the page and then carefully place it down for that next stroke. And so let's see what that looks like here. So I'm going to write the same word, but I'm going to lift my pen after each stroke and place it very carefully and very deliberately in a certain spot. So with this first one, I never lifted my pen. Now I'm going to create each stroke one by one, lifting in between. So I'm making my entrance stroke. I lift my pen. I'm actually going to start my next stroke up here. With this stroke here, I never lifted my pen, but here I'm going to start my next one here. So I'm creating pretty much an ascending stem loop. It's just going to transition into an underturn. But watch what happens when I use my light pressure here and then I come down with that heavy pressure. Notice how it really placed that thick stroke right in between very nicely. You could just plow right through and make that stroke, but it's these little things that really fine tune and clean up your letters. And you'll see when I'm done how much of a difference that makes. So I created my L here. I'm going to lift my pen. I'm going to create my letter E, and I'm going to place it down here. And sometimes I even lift in between a letter, and then I'm going to finish the E here, lifting my pen. And watch, when I do my letter A, it's not just an A. I want you to stop thinking of letters as letters and actually think of them as individual strokes. So your A is not an A. It is this entrance stroke plus the oval plus the underturn. So I kind of did my entrance stroke here. It's part of my E. Now I'm going to do an oval. I'm going to start on this side over here. Remember how I start my oval and I go counterclockwise. So there's my oval. I'm going to lift again. I'm not going to just plow right through and make that next stroke. I'm going to lift, and then I'm going to place my pen here and make my underturn. So see how I started that underturn? And then I'm going to go into a letter R, so that I'm going to bring up that entrance stroke. This is the time that I would go above the waistline for that R. So I'm going to go a little bit higher. And I'm going to lift my pen, put some pressure here, taper off into a thin stroke, and lift again. And then I'm going to put pressure. I'm going to use this line here on the R to sort of make an underturn. So here's my underturn. I'm going to finish that up here, and I'm going to stop a little bit halfway because I'm about to transition into an N. So from here, I'm going to make my overturn. See how that was pretty much an overturn? I just transitioned into one. Now here's the key thing. I'm going to lift here, and I'm going to place my pen on this edge of the stroke, because when I finished here as a right-hander, when I finish this stroke, the tip of my pen is actually on this edge of the stroke. So by lifting and moving my tip to the bottom, look what happens when I create this compound curve. So I'm finishing the compound curve. Look at what happens here. You'll notice that the space in my N really opened up. See that triangle I can fit in there? I can't fit that big of a triangle here in that N because I didn't lift my pen when I created this N right here. I'm gonna even further demonstrate this. I'm gonna pull you over to the side. So when I created that stroke, it was essentially doing something like this, right? So I'm not gonna shade in the part where the thick stroke was, but as a right-hander, my pen tip was on this edge. And then when I create the N, I didn't just start from there. I lifted and then I started on this edge. So now I can create that compound curve. Okay, so lefties, you have the same concerns, but for different letters. So I don't have an example in this word, but say you were writing the letter U. Okay, so as a lefty, if I don't lift my pen, look what happens if I'm making a letter U. So I make my underturn, forgive my shakiness, and then I'm going to, and then after I create that, if I don't lift my pen and just create the next stroke from there, it's really, it overlaps the thick and the thin, and I don't want that overlap. What I want to do is create my thick stroke, my underturn, lift my pen, and then start a little bit to the side, because as I put pressure, it's going to create this thick stroke, and then that can align nicely with that underturn. So it's a little shaky here, but what the takeaway is, look at the overlap that this created, whereas here, remember, kind of like with the N, I have a lot more space inside here compared to not so much space here. So again, we're lifting after each stroke. It seems kind of tedious and it seems like we're taking forever to just write one word, but lift, 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 lift after each stroke. You can even lift in between strokes, meaning if you're making just one stroke, you can even lift in the middle of that stroke. So just make sure that you lift. You can really see the difference in the first example I did here where I didn't lift, and then my second example here. You could just see a lot of the opened space here, whereas here I didn't get too much of that. And then by lifting and coming up and over with my L, see how this area just looks a lot cleaner than here. It just looks so bottom heavy and kind of cluttered at the bottom. And you can just really tell that that is those little things to bring you from, again, basic knowledge to really fine tuning and getting this crisp look. And it's very elegant with your letters. So that's my introduction to connecting. We're gonna start connecting a couple of different strokes so you can get to practicing, and then you can see how that plays a part in all of your letters.